humans, the merchant spat, loud enough for all to hear. Give them food, and they'll hand it to strays, too soft to survive. The crowd chuckled. A chorus of sneers rose from the market, stalls soldiers leaning on their spears, traders counting coin, passers-by eager for cruelty. They expected the human to flinch, to blush, maybe to walk away in shame. Instead, he crouched. His boots sank into the dust as he broke his bread in half. The crust crumbled in his hands as he offered the piece to a child, no taller than his knee. The boy stared at it like it was a trick. The girl beside him, thinner still, clutched his arm with trembling fingers. Their clothes were rags, their hair matted, their eyes hollow with hunger and fear. The human waited, patient, silent. At last, the boy snatched the bread and devoured it, crumbs scattering across the dirt. The girl followed, slower, savoring each bite as though she'd never tasted anything so precious. The laughter grew sharper around them. Wasting rations, someone scoffed. Better feed the rats, another jeered. Even a soldier barked a laugh. Strays will bite you, human, mark my words. But the children didn't bite. They ate. And when the last crumb was gone, they didn't run. They stayed close, their small hands clutching the human's sleeve, holding on as though they had finally found something that wouldn't vanish. The crowd saw weakness. The human only reached into his satchel for the last of his bread, broke it again, and shared. They didn't know it yet, but in that moment, a truth was seated the kind only humans seem to carry, the kind that could shake thrones. His name was Nolan. He had no titles, no lands, no guard posting. A mechanic, once. A long-haul freighter technician from a rimward Earth colony with more dust than trees. He hadn't meant to end up on the capital world of Lyrathian, where glass towers cut the sky and law flowed from the Empress like gravity. He stayed because the gravity didn't scare him. The children had found him 2 weeks after he arrived. At first, he hadn't even noticed them. They watched from alleys, from behind dumpsters, from cracks between broken walls. They moved like ghosts until food appeared. They weren't all the same species. The little girl with yellow eyes and a mane of coarse fur came from a desert tribe near the Black Storms. The boy with 4 fingers and skin like faded bronze had no name, he remembered, only flinches when guards passed by. Some were born in the streets, some were not. They never spoke to anyone, until Nolan. It was the way he sat, not above them, not against a wall with weapons out. He knelt. He shared. He told stories in the dim light of his camp stove, letting the kids lean close, their eyes wide with wonder. And then the little robot said, "You think I'm afraid of space?" Nolan paused dramatically, lifting a spoon like a scepter. "I am space!" The children giggled. One of them, a tiny one with a cracked horn, coughed too hard. Nolan caught her gently by the shoulder, checked her pulse with 2 fingers, his face suddenly serious. "Still warm," he said under his breath. "That's good." She was feverish, malnourished, probably fighting something bacterial. Her glands were swollen, and he could see the shake in her limbs when she tried to laugh. He made a note in his small data pad and gave her a portion of clean water from his pack. "You need to drink slow, all right?" he said softly. "Small sips. There you go." A few of the other kids huddled closer. They watched him like he was doing something impossible. One leaned in and whispered, "Why don't you hit us?" "Because that's not how you treat kids," he replied. That night, he spent the last of his credits on a med kit. Nothing fancy, just thermal wraps, fever reducers, and hydration tabs, enough to keep them stable. By the end of the week, the kids waited for him at dusk. By the end of the month, they were following him in daylight, heads low, eyes sharp. The same people who mocked him before began muttering. "You're drawing them out," said a shopkeeper. "Now they loiter, filthy things." "They're children," Nolan said without looking up. "They're vermin," she snapped. "You'll regret this." He didn't respond. He just handed a peeled fruit to a boy who had stopped eating solids days ago. The kid tried to smile with a mouthful of ulcers. Nolan winced. "We'll need to boil that water more," he murmured. A few days later, he found a small heating unit outside his tent had been kicked in. His cookware was dented, his coat missing. The children were hiding. He didn't ask them what happened. He didn't need to. The morning the guards came, it wasn't subtle. 6 of them marched into the alley with shields and visors. The children vanished instantly. Nolan only saw the shimmer of limbs disappearing into the ruins. But he didn't run. He stayed by the low fire he'd built from scavenged wood, boiling a pot of thin soup. The captain stopped in front of him, visor reflective, voice filtered. Nolan Green. Yeah? You're ordered to stand trial, violation of Subclass Ordinance 671. What's the charge? He asked, standing slowly. Interference with unregistered minors under jurisdictional royal protection. Royal what? He asked. Get up, come with us. The guards didn't lay a hand on him, but they surrounded him carefully, forming a circle. As Nolan looked around, he saw the children peeking from their hiding places. Their eyes were wide. One of them too actually started walking toward him, barefoot, silent. He raised a hand gently. No, stay back, I'll be fine. But they didn't listen. 2 girls, about 6 or 7, with tangled hair and mismatched tunics, emerged fully and clung to his legs. One of the guards twitched, but the captain raised a hand. His tone changed. Do not harm them, he said to the others. Do not touch them at all. The other guards stiffened. One even turned slightly, eyeing the girls with something like recognition. Are these 2? One began. Not your place, the captain said. Escort the human. Nolan didn't argue, but he knelt one last time, his voice soft. Stay here. I'll be back before the sun drops, all right? The girls looked up at him. No, one whispered. Don't go alone. But he had to. The summons had the Empress's seal. Still, as the guards began to lead him out, 2 sets of tiny hands found his again, and they refused to let go. Is this a joke? A noblewoman whispered from her balcony seat. That's the stray feeder? Look at him, rags and mud. The courtroom was built like a coliseum, vaulted pillars, curved seats carved from jetstone, sunlight pouring in through crystal domes. 1,000 alien eyes watched Nolan enter the chamber. He wasn't in chains. But he might as well have been, under the weight of their stares. And still, on either side of him, small hands clutched his fingers. The girls walked with him, heads up, expressions calm. Their clothes were frayed but clean. Their cheeks had color now. Their steps were steady. When they reached the center, Nolan stopped. He let go of their hands for the first time, slowly. I think this is where I stand, he said gently. But the girls didn't step back. They stayed close. Then, at the far end of the hall, the throne stirred. A woman rose tall, elegant, armored in woven gold and starlight blue. Her face was unreadable, but her eyes locked on the children instantly. And the entire room fell silent. Even the nobles. Even the soldiers. The Empress took 1 step forward. Then, another. She didn't speak. She didn't breathe. Her gaze never moved from the girls who stood beside Nolan. And then one of them, the smaller, let go of Nolan's sleeve and ran. Ran straight across the marble floor. Straight into the Empress's arms. The cry she gave wasn't a word. It was a sound: pain, joy, disbelief. The second girl followed, slower, hesitant. But the Empress dropped to her knees and pulled them both into her arms. Gasps rang out across the chamber. A few stood. A few whispered. They're alive. Hidden all this time. But we searched. We thought they burned. Nolan stood still. Then, slowly, the Empress turned to face him. Her face was wet, and she bowed. She bowed to the man who had shared his last bread in an alley of broken walls. The bow itself wasn't long, just enough to ripple through the court like a dropped stone in still water. And then the Empress straightened, her hand still holding the girls against her side, as though afraid they'd vanish again. She didn't speak immediately. She studied Nolan, his sun-worn face, the cut on his brow still red from some street altercation, his patched jacket, the worn soles of his boots. Not a man of rank, not a man of weapons. But not weak, either. Bring forward the record, she said, her voice calm. A scribe, half machine, scuttled forward. A scroll unspooled with a mechanical whir. He read the charges with the cadence of ceremony. Nolan Green, civilian. Species, human. Residence, Provisional. Charges: unlawful interaction with minor citizens under royal jurisdiction, unauthorized allocation of Class C medical supplies, interference with imperial security operations. A pause. Suspected: harboring of lost royal heirs. The final words echoed. Some nobles gasped again, others hissed. That's impossible. They were taken, burned in the riot. DNA scans failed, we searched. Or paid not to search hard enough, someone muttered. The Empress lifted her hand, silencing the room. Nolan finally spoke. His voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. I didn't harbor them, I fed them. The scribe looked to the throne. The Empress gave a slight nod. He stepped back. The court waited. The Empress stepped forward alone. You did more than feed them, she said. They knew no one, trusted no one. For 3 years they were believed dead. They were starving, Nolan replied. Many starve, a noble interrupted from the balcony. A tall, horned dignitary with blue robes and a permanent sneer. That is the order of things. He disrupted that order. Harboring strays breeds chaos. Nolan turned to look at him, his expression calm. I didn't see strays, he said. I saw children. The noble scoffed. And what would you know of our laws, outsider? Of bloodlines? Of balance? I don't, Nolan said. But I know what a fever looks like. I know when a kid hasn't slept in a bed for a month. I know when their ribs show. And I know when they stop crying because they've given up. The court rustled again. One of the girls, Ilari, the younger, moved to Nolan's side again. She didn't say a word, just reached for his hand. The Empress's voice dropped. I ask again, in full record of this court, she said. Did you know who they were? No, Nolan said honestly. They never said. I just saw 2 girls who needed help. Why didn't you report them to the guard? Another noble demanded. Nolan looked at him now. They hid from everyone in uniform. They had bruises that never healed right. One of them flinched every time someone barked an order. You think they'd survive if I handed them over? The noble opened his mouth, closed it, and sat back. The Empress returned to her seat slowly, but her posture had changed. It wasn't regal, it was maternal. My daughters, she said, the words deliberate, like a declaration, were taken in a riot staged to assassinate me. We believed them dead, the assassins burned in the aftermath. She looked at the children again, her hand brushing their hair. They were not killed, they were hidden, smuggled into the lower districts. A cover-up occurred, and not one of my elite, not one of my spies ever found them. Nolan swallowed. They never told me their names, he said. They remembered their names, she replied. They just didn't remember safety. A silence fell again. Finally, the Empress addressed the court. This man stands accused of violating laws of class and protection, she said. Yet he did so with no knowledge of their lineage. He offered food, warmth, and protection. He gave medicine from his own rations. Her gaze swept the balconies. How many of you walked those streets? How many saw these children begging and turned away? And now you dare call him criminal? No one spoke. You say he disrupted order, but I see the kind of order that leaves my own daughters to die in gutters while nobles count coin. She rose again, and this time her voice rang like steel. Let it be known, compassion is not weakness. And in a galaxy of laws, sometimes the strongest thing a man can do is kneel to feed a starving child. Nolan's hands curled slowly. He hadn't expected praise. He hadn't wanted it. But he wasn't sure if the shaking he felt was relief or the end of whatever weight he'd carried all those nights in the alley. I didn't do anything heroic, he said. I didn't rescue anyone. I just made soup and told stories. The Empress looked down at her daughters. They would have died without your soup and stories. A rustle spread through the balconies, not just shock now, but shame. One of the older nobles, a matriarch with milky eyes and ceremonial chains, stood. I withdraw my accusation, she said slowly. This human did more than many of us. Let the record show my support. Others followed, not all, but enough. The scribe nodded once and spoke in a sharp tone. Charges dismissed, recognition pending, case closed. Nolan exhaled and bent down. Ilari still held his hand tightly. You okay? He whispered. She nodded but didn't let go. The Empress stepped down from her dais and extended a hand. My daughters must return to the palace. Nolan nodded. The girls did not move. The Empress knelt. Alari, Shay, it's time. Still, they hesitated. Then Shay finally whispered, Can Nolan come too? The court watched, breathless. And the Empress ruler of 16 worlds nodded. If he wishes. Nolan didn't answer right away. He looked at the two girls, saw the hope in their eyes, and finally gave the smallest smile he'd allowed himself in weeks. I guess I'm not needed in the alley anymore. As he walked with them from the chamber, the nobles watched in silence. The man they'd mocked for kneeling in the dirt now walked at the side of the Empress's daughters. Not because he demanded it, but because they would not let him walk alone. The palace was too quiet. Nolan had expected music, chatter, footsteps echoing in marble halls. Instead, it felt like walking through a memory, the kind no one wanted to disturb. A pair of silent attendants led him down corridors lined with portraits, their expressions all carved from the same stone-faced pride. The Empress walked beside her daughters. Nolan trailed just behind. Every now and then, Ilari glanced back to make sure he was still there. They passed through a chamber of stained glass. The ceiling arched like the ribs of a sleeping giant, and sunlight pooled in colored beams across the floor. Shay tugged at the Empress's hand. Is this where the songbirds used to be? The Empress nodded faintly. They died, Shay whispered. I know, the Empress said. No one said anything else for several steps. A physician met them near the private wing, one of the imperial ones, with gold-trimmed cuffs and a scanning visor shaped like a butterfly. She bowed first to the Empress, then to the children. Finally, after a slight pause, she bowed to Nolan. He blinked at that. The physician motioned them to a sitting room, where soft couches circled a quiet hearth that hadn't been lit in years. Nolan was about to stay back when Ilari pulled him in by the hand. We need him to stay, she said firmly. The physician looked to the Empress, who nodded. Of course, the physician said. We'll begin with a basic scan. Then, blood work. We'll need a full infectious panel, metabolic check, and stress markers. Based on exposure, we may also want to run for chemical residue. Do it, the Empress said. Nolan sat on a low stool near the wall as the tests began. The children sat calmly, holding each other's hands. The scanner passed over their torsos with a soft blue hum, and the physician murmured quietly to an assistant while tapping her datapad. It took nearly an hour. Afterward, she came over to Nolan and crouched beside him. They're stable, she said, but severely undernourished, muscle atrophy. Shay's right arm shows signs of a fracture that healed incorrectly, likely several months old. We'll need to monitor growth plates. Nolan looked down at the floor. He felt the heat rise behind his eyes. Any infections? Mild respiratory distress in Ilari, likely from inhaling smoke or ash. It's chronic now. She'll need therapy. Shay's right lung was punctured at some point, probably during the escape. It healed, but with scarring. Nolan's jaw clenched. He rubbed his hands over his face. How did we miss this? The physician whispered. 3 years. How could they survive like that? They didn't, Nolan said quietly. They just didn't die. That evening, the Empress sent for him again. Not to the throne. To a private study where books lined the walls and a kettle simmered over a low flame. She poured the tea herself and handed him a cup. I know you didn't want this, she said. Nolan didn't answer right away. He looked at the steam curling up from the cup. I didn't do it for any reward. I know. She sipped her own tea, watching him over the rim. You could leave, she said. Take a transport back to your world, or stay. I won't command either. I thought about it, he admitted. After the court, after everything, I figured maybe my part was done. But? He looked out the window, where the lights of the city blinked in the distance. But Ilari has night terrors, and Shay can't sleep unless she knows someone's at the door. He didn't add that they hadn't eaten a full meal without him beside them, or that Shay had started asking him to braid her hair the way he used to for her in the alley, with string and patience. They don't need a hero, he said finally, just someone who doesn't disappear. The Empress nodded once, her eyes softened. I have guards, tutors, healers, advisors. but I've never seen them cling to anyone the way they do to you. I'm not trying to replace anyone, Nolan said quickly. I know they had family before. They have family now, she corrected. And no, you're not replacing anyone. You're filling a place we didn't know was empty. There was silence between them for a moment, thick and warm. Then the Empress leaned forward. There's something else you need to see. The security footage wasn't official. At first, Nolan didn't understand why it looked so grainy. Then he realized it wasn't from the palace's cameras. It had been stolen, leaked. Someone likely, someone powerful, had made sure the Imperial Guard didn't find the girls. The Empress played it on a handheld hollow projector. The recording showed a room on fire. Screaming in the background, shadows darted through smoke. Then a figure, small, two small figures, running. A woman's voice shouted, "Take them, go now." The view jolted. A guard's helmet rolled into frame. Blood. Then, two children bundled in cloaks were shoved through a maintenance tunnel. A worker, a maintenance woman in tattered uniform, lifted them one at a time, whispering something in a language the translator didn't recognize. Who was she? Nolan asked. No one, the Empress said. An engineer. Her name wasn't even on the palace roster. She must have snuck in after hours. Is she still alive? The Empress shook her head. She delayed the attackers long enough for the tunnel to close. Then, nothing. Nolan closed his eyes. So, the kids wandered from the underlevels into the alleys. And you found them, she said. He shook his head slowly. No, they found me. 3 days passed. The medical team began physical therapy sessions for the girls. They were careful, gentle. But even among soft hands and warm blankets, Nolan was the constant. He taught them how to build tiny puzzles with old hardware bits. He told more stories about deserts and stubborn goats, and how humans had once crossed oceans on boats made of trees. They listened with wide eyes. Sometimes they laughed, sometimes they cried. Once, Shay asked if he had daughters. No, he said softly. Why not? He shrugged. Didn't get around to it. Then, can we be yours? The words hit him so hard he couldn't speak for a full minute. He just reached for her hand and nodded, holding it like it was the most fragile thing in the world. The Empress made the declaration a week later, before the same nobles who once sneered at him. She stood before the court, her daughters beside her, and addressed the chamber. These past years, the Empire has spoken of strength, she said, of bloodlines, of control. She placed her hand on Shay's shoulder. But my daughters lived because someone saw through all that, a man with no wealth, no title, no power but compassion. She turned to Nolan and gestured for him to stand. Nolan Green saved not only my heirs, but my faith in what strength truly means. Not command, not dominance, but the strength to kneel beside a child and say, "You matter." Nolan looked across the court. No jeers now, no laughter. Only quiet. Then, one by one, they stood. The nobles, the ministers, the merchants. Not because they were told to. Because the truth was standing right in front of them, holding a child's hand. It was raining the day Nolan took the girls back to the alley. Not for good, just for closure. The Empress had arranged it quietly, no guards, no media. Just a simple transport and a rainproof coat for each of them. Shay wore hers unzipped, arms outstretched to feel the drops. Alari stayed close, her smaller hand clenched around Nolan's. The market stalls were different now, cleaner. Someone had swept the gutters, patched the broken awnings. The alley still smelled faintly of smoke and old oil, but the rot was gone. They painted over the old words, Shay said, pointing to the wall where "Vermin Out" had once been scrawled in dripping red. It had been replaced with a mural half-finished, a pair of hands holding bread. Small ones reaching up. Nolan looked at it for a long time. They'll finish it soon, Alari said. The artist is one of the older strays. They're not calling them that anymore, Nolan replied. There's a new name, Street Found. Not perfect, but better. He helped the girls over a low puddle and walked toward the place where his tent had once stood. It was gone, of course. But someone had laid flat stones there now, forming a little circle. And in the middle, still unlit, was a fire pit. There were voices, too. Children's voices. Not just Shay and Ilaris, others, dozens, laughing, talking, some arguing over game pieces, some drawing in chalk, some watching Nolan with wide, uncertain eyes. An older woman, grizzled, thick arms, one mechanical leg, stood near the side, her coat soaked through. She stepped forward, squinting. "You're him," she said, "the one who used to cook soup with a wrench as a ladle." Nolan scratched his neck, sheepish. "I upgraded, got a proper pot now." She didn't laugh, just looked him up and down, then at the girls, and gave a single, solemn nod. "They trust you." "Oh." He nodded back. "They trusted me first." The Empress's new programs had only just begun. Street found centers, free food clinics, real medical checks. It would take years to undo what had been done. But it had started. Because someone had fed a kid. Later, back at the palace, Nolan sat in the courtyard, watching the girls chase each other around the fountain. He still didn't wear royal robes. He still fixed broken things in the service tunnels when the fancy engineers failed to notice loose cables. The palace staff had given up trying to stop him. He did it for routine, for peace, but mostly because he hated waste. If something could be fixed, why throw it away? A soft voice pulled him from thought. "You still keep the satchel," the Empress said, walking over. Nolan looked down. The same canvas bag he'd carried since the alleys sat on the bench beside him, scuffed, worn, stitched in 5 places. Inside it, still, were half a dozen pieces of bread. He carried them everywhere, without fail. "I've got a reputation now," he said. "People expect me to have snacks." She smiled, just faintly. "I remember when they laughed at you, even my advisors. I remember when they spat. I remember when they stopped." She looked out toward her daughters. Shay had climbed halfway up a tree. Ilari was under it, shouting instructions. "They're healing," the Empress said. "Slowly," Nolan said. "As it should be." She sat beside him on the stone bench. "There are some," she said, "who still think what you did was foolish, dangerous, that you disrupted balance." "Maybe I did," he said, "but that balance was already killing people." He reached into the satchel and pulled out a piece of bread, broke it in half. She watched as he offered it to her, hesitated, then took it. It was dense, Earth-style, baked in the kitchens on his request. No spices, just flour, water, salt, and heat. They ate in silence. Then she said, "There will be statues one day, history books, tales of the man who walked into court with my daughters holding his hands." "They'll get it wrong," Nolan said. "They'll say I knew who they were, that I had some great plan. Maybe, but the truth lives here." She tapped her chest lightly. "And here," she added, nodding toward the courtyard. Shay had reached the top of the tree and was shouting that she could see the whole city. Ilari waved up at her. "They think you're their family now," the Empress said quietly. Nolan's throat tightened. "I'm not trying to be—" "You already are." He looked at her. "Do you mind?" She smiled. "No, I thank you for it." That night, in the quiet of his room, Nolan sat by the fire with the girls curled against him, half asleep. Shay's foot was bandaged. She'd twisted it, trying to jump from the tree, but the medics said it was just a sprain. Ilari had fallen asleep with a storybook in her lap. The flicker of the flames danced across their faces. He thought back to the alley, the first time he saw them, thin, dirty, eyes like corners of empty rooms. Now their eyes held stars. He didn't believe in fate, or destiny, or royal bloodlines, but he believed in this. In warm bread, in clean water, in stories shared under firelight, in the simple human truth that every child, no matter where they were born, deserves someone to stay. The empire hadn't changed overnight, but it had changed. And it started with bread. Nolan tucked the blanket tighter around the girls, leaned back, and closed his eyes. Outside, the wind carried the faint sound of laughter, street-found kids playing late, voices rising into the sky like prayers. Not for thrones, not for glory. Just for another day with full bellies, safe hands, and a world that finally saw them. And that, he thought, was enough.